Say good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you're from. My name is Dwayne Quasey Wright. I have the privilege and honor of serving as an assistant professor of higher education administration, as well as the director of diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives here at the Graduate School of Education and Human Development, which of course is part of the George Washington University here in our nation's capital. Here at the tail end of Women's History Month, as has become the typical practice here at GSHED, we want to come and together to honor not just our departing faculty, but our entire GSHED community and the women that make it run. I like to say here at GSHED, the majority of our dean's cabinet are women, the majority of our chairs are women, our programs directors. And as we know, women have always held disproportionate labor for educating not just the community and the society. And somehow, while doing the labor at home and the labor in the field, they not only get it done, but succeed all expectations. And the two people that we are hearing from today are absolutely no exception. I am privileged and honored to be able to get a glimpse of their stories. But as I was telling them before we started, to just be able to learn from them as a learned young professor was a remarkable blessing. And I just want to, on the onset, thank them both for this. Today, the conversation will go as follows. I'm going to introduce the MC, and then after the MC, we're going to get into hearing their stories, hearing about their scholarship, and then Dean Daniels and Dr. Scully-Russ will ask questions of each other before giving you the opportunity to get any wit and wisdom from them. But to get started now, I would like to introduce our MC, the chair of the GSHED DEI committee, and that is Dr. Sandra Vanderbilt. Dr. Sandra K. Vanderbilt is an educator and community-based researcher here in Washington, D.C. Her interests include youth storytelling, counterstory, critical literacy, critical disability studies, disability justice, and the life and educational philosophy of Mr. Rogers. That last one always gets me every time. She's currently engaged in archival part project in partnership with the Fred Rogers Institute, in which you will be able to include grad students specializing in teaching qualitative methods. Dr. Vanderbilt supports students in GSA community and those across the university and the consortium. Yes, everyone comes to take our research methods courses. She enjoys exploring the ways that theory informs research practice and working with students to find ways to best hear and learn from study participants. It is an honor to introduce, to moderate this event, my friend, the chair of the GSHED Diversity Committee, Dr. Sandra Vanderbilt. Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wright, for that lovely introduction. And thank you, Drs. Dannels and Scully-Russ, for joining us today. I am so excited to have a Women's History Month session with both of you, and just delighted to learn more. As someone that I suppose I'm mid-career, I look up to you both so much. And I know that I have benefited from being your colleague and just can't wait to soak it all in today. So I have the honor of introducing both of our guests of honor today, our speakers. I'll kick it off with Dr. Dannels. Sharon Dannels is an associate professor emerita of educational research. While she was here at GW, she also served as Associate Dean for Doctoral Studies and led so much around supporting the dissertation process and guiding students through what the process should look like. And also when students face challenges, I've learned so much in my years being able to work with Dr. Dannels about supporting students well. So we saw that in that role as Associate Dean and in her role as Department Chair for Dell. Her undergraduate work was in sociology and social work. She holds master's degrees in clinical social work and psychology, and her PhD is in experimental psychology. And she completed postdoctoral study in internal medicine. Her research uses both quantitative and qualitative methods. She contributed to the research and served as the evaluator of a wide range of grant-funded projects, training interpreters to work with deaf clients with atypical language, work of the Educational Facilities Clearinghouse, emergency preparedness in public schools, and leadership programs designed to develop the leadership potential of mid-career women faculty in academic medicine, engineering, and STEM fields in higher education. She's also consulted with Virginia Beach City Public Schools in their Department of Accountability. Dr. Dannels, in addition to all of that support of doctoral students in all of the years that I was able to work with her, also taught doctoral level statistics and research design courses and has served on countless doctoral dissertation committees. And she's written about research design in such venues as the widely used text, The Reviewer's Guide to Quantitative Methods in Social Sciences. So we're just so lucky to hear from you today, Dr. Dannels, and thank you for being here. And I also have the honor to introduce Dr. Scully-Russ. Dr. Ellen Scully-Russ is an associate professor of human and organizational learning here in GSHED, and her scholarship and practice are focused on the role of adult education in meeting the individual and political economic challenges of the emerging knowledge society. With expertise in qualitative research methods, she has studied the interdependencies of work organization and individual learning in traditional as well as emerging occupations. And with that, supported also countless doctoral students in their dissertation journeys, I know from a wide range of methodological perspectives and from a wide range of theoretical perspectives. So her work bringing that together, I know, has benefited both the people that you have chaired their dissertations, but I also know even in a more widespread way, your students in general and students that encounter your students in courses have learned so much based on your influence. Dr. Scully-Russ has more than 25 years of experience as a workplace learning and workforce development practitioner as well in a wide range of industries, including healthcare, telecommunications, manufacturing, hospitality, and the public sector. She has worked with dozens of union management partnerships on the firm, regional, and industrial levels to develop policies and programs that meet the dual goals of supporting individual learning and development and improving industry and firm performance. She also served as a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer in Liberia in the early 1980s. And Dr. Scully-Russ is an affiliated faculty member of the Global Food Institute here at GW. And so we have the opportunity to learn today from both of these incredible scholars and people. And so I would love to, Dr. Dannels, if you're ready, hear more from you.
Thank you so much for the flattering introduction, which, seems a bit excessive. But I would also like to thank everybody for taking the opportunity to attend this session. I think both Ellen and I have sort of different entrances into higher education. Mine clearly is not the typical, but I think it also can be informative. I grew up basically in Southern California, one of four siblings, and both my parents were public school teachers. Right out of college, I married my current husband. I like to remind him of that it's, still negotiable. And as a graduate of the Air Force Academy, he had a commitment to the Air Force, but he was supposed to have his pick of assignments. So I had a doctoral program. We kind of lined up what we could in terms of Air Force bases and doctoral programs, and I lined up a doctoral program. And so he requested to be assigned to a base in Utah. So the Air Force sent us to Spokane, Washington. So from there, we realized that higher education and military bases are not co-located. So he volunteered for a recruiting assignment where he would be in a recruiting station. And so he requested a recruiting station in Ann Arbor, Michigan, so I could attend the University of Michigan. The Air Force sent us to Milwaukee. We spent many, many years trying to figure out how we could negotiate higher education with the military. And we basically moved every 3 years, and I reinvented myself as we moved to each location. I worked as a group counselor in a treatment facility for delinquent girls when we were in Spokane. In Milwaukee, I pursued my master's degree in clinical social work. I worked as an outpatient therapist and director of a county mental health center while we were in Wichita, Kansas. So all of those opportunities, were made available because of my background in sociology and social work. When we got to Oklahoma City, I pursued my PhD. I had intended to stick with a clinical program, but OU had discontinued their clinical psych program. So I decided I would pursue experimental psych and then do an internship afterwards so that I could be licensed for practice. But once I got there, I got hooked on the research and I never turned back. My research there focused primarily on the effects of subcortical arousal and what effects this has on performance and personality. My dissertation was a test of Hans Eysenk's theory of introversion extroversion, where I was testing his theory on the biological basis of personality. Our next move took us to Langley here in Hampton, Virginia, and I started attending a brown bag research meetings that were being held at the VA hospital. There were researchers from multiple disciplines all working on the issues around obesity, and each of them would present on the research that they were doing. Eventually, this turned into a postdoc in internal medicine for me, and I conducted research on the weight loss and directed several of the clinical trials that they had going on. From Langley, we went to Okinawa, Japan, and here I found a position in the local schools where I modeled and encouraged conversational English and talked about American culture. I also was able to teach courses with the University of Maryland and found it particularly challenging to teach Freud's theory to young Marines. They frequently had different perspectives, but I enjoyed that immensely. After 4 years, we returned to Langley, and it was at that time that I began my work with George Washington. I started as an adjunct faculty member and then convinced them. It was at that point that GSHD was revising their doctoral curriculum. And we had 2 large doctoral programs down here in Hampton, and I convinced them that it just would be unconscionable to not have a research methodologist to work with those students down here. So I started as an adjunct, then came on as part-time contract, and then was eventually hired as full-time contract. And so I just kind of backed into my academic career. But over the years, I've conducted studies on the biological basis of personality, the effect of prophylactic drugs on military pilot performance, the development of the Army's blind helicopter, the role of subcortical arousal in obesity, the efficacy of double gloving in surgery to prevent HIV due to accidental stabs in surgery. So my background, it was very difficult when I went up for promotion because they want to see a clear trajectory of looking at how your research has developed in one field. So I really had to sell the idea of the importance of this accumulated variety of experiences. So that's kind of how I eventually ended up at GW. And again, my degree was in psychology, and I would have loved a position teaching psychology. But throughout my rather speckled career, it was my ability to teach research methods. Nobody needed faculty to teach psychology. Those people, once they're in that position, they're not going anywhere. They're there for life. And so, I would always say, well, I could teach your methods courses. And so that's how I sort of backed into the academy. While at GW, I think, as Sandra mentioned, much of my research was with on funded projects. And I think the thing that really saved my career, I was working in many administrative positions. I was the department chair and then eventually the associate dean for doctoral studies. And it was very difficult to get research done on my own because it's always the first thing that falls off of the plate. But I was fortunate to get involved in working with some research teams. The first one was a team of women, all from multiple disciplines and from multiple universities. And so, you can't let the team down. So I always had to, keep up with whatever my commitment was with them. And so we had many years of grant funded research looking at the women in male-dominated careers like academic medicine and engineering. So looking at women faculty and the development of them to take on these leadership roles. From that, one of my colleagues on that team recommended me to a team of researchers at her university that were looking for a methodologist. And that's where I started to work on training interpreters to work with clients whose language is atypical. And so I've been involved with them. We had a 5-year grant and then a second 5-year grant, which I continue to work on. It will end this September. And the Department of Ed has just put out a call for a very generic grant for interpreting, but I think we're going to go ahead and try to see if we can work something out there. So that kind of summarizes my research at the main thrust of my research at GW. As far as publications, probably the one I'm most proud of is the one that Sandra had mentioned, the chapter in the textbook that has been used for in many the universities use it as a text in their methods programs. And it was first published in 2010 and then a major revision in 2019. So that's kind of my academic side of my time at GW. I think I'll kind of leave it there unless there's something more specific that I was supposed to cover.
I think that was wonderful. I was writing down notes and encouragements to myself of your quoting you. So I think that was great. Thank you so much. Dr. Dannels. And now I will pass it over to Dr. Scully-Russ.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandra. And thank you, Dwayne, for your invitation to join everybody here today. I'm just so honored to be part of this panel with my good friend and colleague, Dr. Dannels, who's actually been a great source of inspiration and support for me my whole time at GShed. She's just a great friend and colleague and just a wonderful educator who puts the students first in every situation. So I've always appreciated her sage advice and good laughs along the way. And Sandra and Dwayne, you're doing such great work with the diversity work that you do and all the other work that you do in GShed. Your commitment is just really to the institution is palpable, and it's really inspirational for all of us. And so, I just am in awe of all the things that you do for not only our students but the community of GShed. So thank you very much. And being invited here today really makes me feel even more part of it. So thank you. And I also want to say shout out to a lot of our HOL students and former ELP alum and current doctoral candidates. It's so great to have you all here. And my friend and dear colleague Maria Che, Dr. Che, who's also been a source of support for me through many years here at GShed. She oriented me here and continues to keep me oriented at times when I need to be tethered. So thank you, Maria. And she and I actually work together on a lot of scholarly things that I'll mention here today too. So appreciate your all being here, your support. Looking forward to your questions and discussions. I also, like Dr. Dannels, had a kind of unusual, if you would call it, route into academia. I actually, Sandra, I think we need to update my bio for you. I
Yeah.
actually had over 30 years working in industry, through my work with labor unions on building what I call opportunity structures for workers in all kinds of industries, mostly frontline, low-waged workers who, kind of went to work every day and never really had much opportunity. And so what we would do is we would negotiate not only the resources to provide people access to education and training, but we would also negotiate policies and classification structures that allowed for people to apply their knowledge and training and their skills and expertise, which went unrecognized for many, many years, to advance in the workplace and to contribute in new ways. So we created all kinds of what I came to call opportunity structures through negotiations that would provide career ladders where none existed for folks to move people out of low wage, what we used to call dead end jobs, into careers, in nursing and technology and other kinds of technical occupations, all the way into the managerial and the professional class. So we did that work for many, many years. And the reason why I found myself in the academy was because our approach to negotiating firm-based opportunity structures was no longer working. So I like to call my theories in use. We're not working anymore because the labor market had become so much more fluid, and work became so much more contingent, and people were moving in and out of jobs more rapidly than they ever had before. So, what was I to do when my, approach to things weren't necessarily working anymore? The power of unions in many industries was waning as well. So although I think the programs that we did build and we still run are enhanced over the ones that are just unilaterally provided by employers, because we provide a voice for workers in the design and operation of these programs that may not exist in other environments. But be that as it may, so that work was not as effective, and the platform from which I did it was no longer as strong either. So I found myself back working on a master's degree. That's where I started. I mean, I had left higher ed with a BA in sociology and a minor in political science in 1980, and went into the Peace Corps and then came home and started working with the unions at that time. So I hadn't been back to school for many, many, many years. And funny enough, somebody said, well, you need to get, a degree. You ought to go talk to Dr. Victoria Marsick over at Teachers College about this great program she runs called Aegis, which was very much ELP, for those of you who went through the ELP, was modeled off on this program in terms of providing access to doctoral education to working professionals. And, so that had what we used to call the executive style approach to structuring the education. People came in on weekends, that kind of thing. So I went to talk to Victoria, and we talked for about an hour until she realized that I didn't have a master's degree and I couldn't get into Aegis until I had one. So she enrolled me that night into a class, so that I could just start taking classes and earn my master's degree, which I did. And so let me back up a little bit and talk a little bit about sort of my personal background, because I think it's a big part of the story of my research and my work that I did with the unions and I continue to do today. Provide some context here. I grew up in a large family. There are 5 of us in 6 years. Yeah. So my older brother is, I just had a birthday. He hasn't had one yet. We're the same age right now. Next week, he'll be a year older than me. And he was 6 years old for 1 week when my youngest brother was born. So yes. So not so grew up in a large Irish Catholic family. Went to what we used to call parochial school, which used to be Catholic school, but it was also parochial. It earned its name. And so everybody I grew up with was white Irish Catholic. And so come 18 years old, I don't know why I decided to go on to college, but I did. I was the only one in my family to ever get a higher degree of the 5 children. And I was the only one of my crowd in high school that went on to college. There were other students who did, but the ones I ran with didn't. Now, back then, we all had other options, right? It wasn't just college or some kind of dead-end job. I mean, people went to trade school, they went to Katie Gibbs to learn secretarial skills, they got administrative jobs. They've had wonderful jobs. And my younger sister is almost a VP at 3M, with a uh, associate's degree, we didn't even call it that then, from Katie Gibbs in secretarial school. So the opportunity structures were a lot different back then. And we all had different options. And many of my friends and colleagues and siblings, took other pathways. Um, and so, but however, we were all kind of working class kids. We worked. From the time we were able to babysit or mow a lawn or deliver a newspaper. We all worked. At 15 years old, I got my first real job at the Palace Diner, pouring coffee. Learned a lot about life pouring that coffee behind that diner counter to cops and business people and school teachers and whoever would walk in the door, right? Um, Also, my father used to take us to work. You take your kids to work day, right? Used to take he worked for an ice cream company. They made the ice cream, and so he would take the kids to the factory, and we'd go on tours, and we'd go up over the catwalk, and we'd see the ice cream in the making and packaging, and going out the door in trucks, and of course we'd all get a bit of ice cream on the other end. And then my grandmother also took me to work. She worked in the Empire State Building. I'm from Jersey. I guess it was a big hall full of women. She was a bookkeeper, and they were all bookkeeping. And she used to bring me in, for the morning, and I'd sit up on the wood on the windowsill, kind of watching the street go by and watching her chat with the ladies and doing her bookkeeping thing. So I just was kind of introduced to the world of work very early on, and I was fascinated by it. It just, for whatever reason, captured my attention, kind of how it works, how you learn it, how you do it, who you meet when you do it, who has opportunity to, advance, who doesn't, why, those kinds of questions always kind of motivated me, even as a kid. So it made no surprise to me that I kind of ended up working with labor unions around building education and training infrastructures that help people navigate the world of work. And my research was in that area as well. As I had said earlier, that I went back to university to work on my then master's degree because what I was doing wasn't working the way I expected it to. So after I finished my degree in New York, my associate's degree, for which I was also working with the unions at the time, I moved to DC to go take a job with the AFL-CIO in their Work and Technology Institute, which later became the Working for America Institute, which did a lot of work in the public workforce development system. So I took on a policy job rather than the hands-on programmatic job. Um, and I met my husband and got married, and just didn't have time to go back to school. I was just too busy with other things, and just really thought that the goal of the doctorate degree was kind of slipping away, and it's just moving on with life until my advisor, Dr. Victoria Marsick, found herself in DC for a meeting, and she called me up. She goes, "We need to talk." I invited her to dinner with my husband, who had just met her that day as she entered our house. And sure enough, they just ganged up on me. And by the end of that dinner, they had me committing to go back for my doctorate degree. And that's what I did. Um, so it's pretty much how I found my way into academia. So briefly, my dissertation was on work, learning, and institutionalization in an emerging labor market. And it was a case study of the emerging labor market back then in Washington, D.C., of what we now call social media. Back then, we called it new media. And I interviewed people through the learning life history methodology about their entry into this new media space and how they were crafting new skills and relationships to not only learn the work, but to create the work as they were learning it, right? And I interviewed half the sample were people that had moved into that space from formal journalism careers, and the other half moved into that space from other careers and endeavors just because they were interested in it. And found a lot of interesting things about the distribution of knowledge and the creation of skills and how people kind of learn their work and create opportunity structures as they go along with that work. So that was kind of the launching of my research agenda. But as I moved into completing my dissertation, I just thought I would continue to do the work I had always done. I was at the time, throughout my doc career, consulting with the Coalition of Kaiser Permanente Unions. We negotiated a training fund for them, and I was setting it up and hiring the folks and doing all the behind the scenes structural work. And I figured I would just continue to do that kind of work in other industries with other groups. And sure enough, my advisor, Victoria Marsick, had different ideas. There's a theme here. Apparently, Dave Schwant, some of you might remember Dr. Schwant, some of you may not. He was the founder, one of the founders of the ELP, and then was running it at the time. He called up Victoria and said, we're recruiting somebody with wanting a background in adult ed for a faculty position. Do you know of anybody? She goes, not only do I know of anybody, she lives there and she has the credentials that you're looking for. And one of the credentials that we always hired for in the ELP was that you needed to be a little old. because our student body was not, they were not kids. They were, actively working professionals, and we needed to put seasoned professionals and scholars in the classroom with them. Otherwise, they would have run circles around us. So that's kind of, I was old, I was there, I was offered the job. I actually did have a great interview with everybody. Diana Burley, those of you who remember her, she was on the committee. Carol Hoare, who was also a dear friend and colleague who's retired, she was also on the committee. So between the two of them, they convinced me to join. And Maria was on sabbatical at the time, but came in feet first when she returned and been a really good mentor to me along the way. So that's kind of how I got here. Um, didn't expect it. But that's kind of backing into that, which I think, I share with Sharon on that. Sort of the opportunity presented itself. And I took it, I gave it a try, and I loved it. Um, so here we are 17 years later, and I'm getting ready to retire. And so looking back at those 17 years, to respond to some of the questions that I've been asked to reflect on here today, kind of what is my research, or what has been my research agenda? It's pretty much been the way I made sense of it for uh, my tenure portfolio is still pretty relevant today, I think. I always looked at it as sort of a three-pronged approach, right? Or three levels of analysis. One is sort of the broader political economy, and the trends associated with industrial restructuring, and just the changing nature of work, which is more of a sociological question in my mind than an industrial one, right? Than a work-oriented one. So there's been, a variety of research studies and more conceptualization that I've offered through publications on that level of analysis. The second mid-level is kind of what I call those opportunity structures, kind of how they emerge, how they develop, what are the policy implications, how are they run. And I'm talking about like industrial workforce partnerships where industry and other stakeholders come together to provide workforce development, education, and training across the region or across an industry for folks. I've done a fair amount of work in that area on the firm and on the industry level as well. So things like skill standards and the development of partnerships and what's the policy and relational dynamics that support that or get in the way. And then finally, sort of the individual level of analysis and how is it that, people learn to work and learn, and kind of how is it that, skills are both acknowledged and recognized, how they're not, and how do we foster more opportunity on the workplace level and in the relational dynamics that people face at work. And so a lot of that research, I mean, I've got pubs that sort of are attached to those three streams. And so, I've been pretty proud of some of that work. It's been acknowledged by the Academy of Human Resources Development, for example. Maria and I put a special issue out there of advances in human resources development that won the best volume award back in, I think, 15. I've had a best paper award in human resources review. Our 25th anniversary book for the ELP won the best book award that year for AHRD. And I've had a variety of my dissertations acknowledged as well, with the Malcolm Knowles Dissertation of the Year Award from AHRD. So I've been, pretty proud for the contributions that I've made. I've really enjoyed my research and my writing. But I also want to say that a lot of what I have studied has informed my work with students and in the classroom and in the program. I do want to maybe conclude with a few comments there. I've really enjoyed my time as the director of the ELP. where I got to work with some of my colleagues and my students in developing new curricula frameworks. When I first was brought on board, I was told that the adult learning course was more of a um, learning and development course. It was really about developing students, from, entry level professionals into doc students, so it was more about facilitating their learning and not necessarily studying learning, theory and researching learning. And I just thought that was a missed opportunity. So I spent my first years trying to disentangle those objectives because I really do think they were all equally important. To the point where I was able to redesign the adult learning course so that it was really a doctoral level course in adult learning theory in empirical work. And also was able to move the developmental work for individuals and the community, development of a learning community and of scholarly practice identities, into another course, which we designed, which we called Learning Community. And so a lot of the ELP students that came through the program under my leadership, for lack of a better word, all had, participated in one form or another in that learning community where we looked, at Dewey's work on ethics. We engaged in what we called learning life history activities and exercises, which I think were very informative for a lot of the students. Many of the students went on to use that work in their own dissertation and their own work. And so through that work, I developed a lot of sort of frameworks and theories around scholarly practice, which I have published. I'm looking at Kristen here. She's helped me with one of those articles. Yeah. So, and there's a framework that we still use today, that we've built the curriculum around, that help to move people through this identity development process, as they develop their doctoral skills and pursue their doctoral journey. So I just really want to maybe conclude by saying, I've been thinking a lot lately about kind of my own transition, and kind of what's next for me. Um, and you can't really think about that deeply, I think, without also thinking about, the work that you've done in the past and the work that you're proud of and the work that you're not so proud of, right? And I have to say that in terms of the work that I've done at the Academy, in GSHED specifically, and also in Teachers College, because I have worked at Teachers College and across other universities in research partnerships, as Maria knows, because she's a colleague in that as well. I have to say my time with students in the classroom and advising is probably some of my more memorable moments here. The good, the bad, the beautiful, the ugly. It's all there. It's life, I think. And I just am so proud of the work that they all are doing in the world, the commitments that they brought to their doctoral studies, and kind of the path they've taken since. It's just been a delight to accompany many of them along the way, and a privilege. So I think I'm going to stop there. I know we wanted to talk a little bit about the role of women and how that's changed, but maybe we can open it up in more of a conversational approach to that, because I think it's complicated. And yeah, so
Great.
I'll leave it
Thank
at
you.
that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Scully-Russ. So what we would like to do now is spend about the next 10 to 15 minutes. If anything emerged across the conversation, and to open it up for the two of you to have more of a conversation. And then I've been keeping track of some of the questions in the chat, and so
good.
I'll open those up to you as well. But before I jump to the chat, I would love if you had a question that emerged for each other, or a comment, to go ahead and open it up to that.
Well, one thing. Oh, go ahead, Sharon. Oh, go ahead. You're on mute.
I didn't realize I had the ability to unmute myself because before I was summarily muted. Um, One of the things, Ellen, with your emphasis on workforce development and then your comment on the changing nature
Mhm.
of work, can you talk more directly about the implications that has for GSHED?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, let me start with the workforce development piece, because I do think that there's lots of opportunities for GSHED to get involved, more involved in that world. To be honest, I've moved away from it, so I haven't really kept a lot of, on the policy level anyway, I've kind of lost track of where it's gone because it's just a crazy space right now. Um, but I also think that, there's lots of opportunities for GSHED to get involved in workforce development. I've actually continued my involvement in that space through relationships in two different places at GW. One is I'm affiliate at the Fritz Mullins Workforce Equity Center at the School of Public Health. I do a fair amount of workforce development work with them in the healthcare world. And also there's a coalition of certification providers that is assembled under the auspices of the GW Public Policy Institute, that does a lot of cross-university research on things like skill standards, certifications, and accreditation for occupations, not university-based training, but for occupation training. So there's a lot of opportunity for us to contribute. One of the critiques I always had of the workforce development world and also the literature on the changing nature of work is that it presumes a high level of learning required in today's kind of labor market and emerging jobs, but it doesn't really have a good theory of learning. It just, people need to learn, people need knowledge, right? And so I think there's a great opportunity for GSHED scholars to contribute to that conversation and enhance the view of what learning is in that environment and how to support it. I'm looking at Erica here, who I know does a lot of work with adults, and she understands, our students understand that, part of the challenge is just even getting people to recognize that these folks have knowledge, they have skills, they have abilities that go unrecognized and therefore unsupported. I think there's a tremendous amount that we could be doing in terms of curriculum, in terms of policy, in terms of research with that population, and with the people who hire them, because it's not really that population who need the support. It's the people who hire them, the people who manage them, right? The leaders who I think really need a deeper perspective of what we mean by learning and how it occurs in the world. I think there's lots of opportunity. I just don't know where the funding is these days, right? I mean, that's always been the challenge, right, Sharon, and to getting the funding. The changing nature of work, to me, that's more of a philosophical question and a sociological question, which I said earlier, than it is sort of a technological question, right? I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, the kinds of work we do and how we do it is shifting and has been shifting for generations, forever, right? But the role of work in people's lives and how it is that life gets organized around work and how is it that identities get developed through their work, and how is it that relationships are matter in that, right? And that's all, I think, more philosophical and sociological questions around, how is work changing? How is its role in our lives changing? That's a generational question. I think the way in which Sharon, you and I entered into the workplace is a lot different than the way in which many of our students and their kids are entering into the workplace today. Um, I just think that, overlaying our tried and true theories of work on that experience doesn't really do a lot of good for folks. And I think that's another area of research for GSHED scholars, I believe. Yeah. So Sharon, one of the things I gleaned from both of our comments here today is how diverse our backgrounds really are. I mean, we really weren't um, the academics in the true sense, right? We didn't come up through research. You did a postdoc, which I think is more traditional than my pathway was, but we kind of like crafted things as we went along. I'm wondering if that kind of mobility and fluidity is something that was our privilege, right? Or part of our privilege, right? That other folks today, younger folks, just don't really have that kind of liberal exploration opportunity. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, there's a number of things that made it possible for me. And I think part of it has to do with the ability to relate past experiences to new experiences. This is how this is how my past can benefit you in looking at, bringing in fresh perspectives. Um, I really believe in the importance of not being siloed. The fact to be able to work across um, different disciplines or different areas, I think it is really a benefit. And I think, that was very obvious with the research team that I worked with on the ELAM and ELATE research. The fact that we all came from a different perspective, we viewed things from a slightly different perspective, and had to piece together how could each of the separate areas inform the overall um, issue we were dealing with. And I think that also introduces the importance of networks. The fact that people in different areas that bring different things that you can draw on, I think it is very important.
Great.
I see some real juicy questions in the
Very,
chat. I don't know, Sandra, do you want to maybe take over the
yeah.
driver's seat here?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm gonna try to get to everybody's. I've been taking the questions out of the chat and I've organized them around some general things that I'd like to pose to both of you. And then we have some questions that are around your disciplinary expertise, your previous research. And so I'm hoping we can get to everything. If I miss your question, I apologize in advance to those. Thank you for continuing to put them in the chat, but I've organize them a bit here. And I'd like to start with a series of questions that I think are for both of you, and that I know that both of you have insights for us. So the first question was posed to Dr. Dannels, and I think I'd love to hear responses from both of you. The question reads, you touched on having to explain or translate it, and it transitions perfectly from what you were just saying. Translate your non-traditional path to others in order to obtain opportunities. Can you speak more about how you were successful in doing this? In today's market, it seems that unicorns are passed over in favor of more traditional professional experiences and routes. And Dr. Dannels was just speaking to this idea of a unifying story and also the benefit of an extensive network. Anything else to add to how you were able to successfully take all of these different experiences that you have, and or what you might advise someone who's coming onto the market to do if they have sort of broad work experience and diverse research interests?
I think in my experience, most of the time, I had the advantage of what I would say would be sort of a soft entry. Getting to know the people involved, um, listening to what it is that they were really looking for ways that I could contribute. And so I think kind of knowing what the needs were going forward helped me to kind of spin what it is that I had to offer. And I was privileged. I was in a position that, I didn't have to financially support myself. And so I had the luxury of being able to, make these sorts of moves. But it was, Ellen was talking about the difference time when she and I entered the workforce. One of the things that I found hilarious was that the military at the time, my husband was a young officer in the Air Force. They were dealing with having to deal for the first time with dual career members. And I was incredulous. The base commander had a mandatory meeting for all spouses to discuss dual career families. It's like, wait a minute. I did not attend, so I'm not sure what was said at that meeting, but anyway, that's off track.
No,
No,
that's
it's
really
not.
interesting.
Context. Yeah.
Yeah. Ellen, did you have thoughts on?
Yeah, I just think it was a very different time. And my heart goes out to younger people starting in their careers today. Because the access is, we talk about, access all the time, but the access is so much more constrained than it was when we were younger. I can remember, writing people letters, because I found their name in the encyclopedia of associations. And I was going to go to DC looking for a job, and I wrote a dozen letters, and I got a dozen interviews, from people I just said, I want to pick your brain, right? Today, you got this AI-driven application process where if you don't hit the right buzzwords, you don't even get a return letter back from the hiring authority, right? Or their representative, which, who is that these days? I have no idea. It's not HR, or it could be, but not in HR from my day. Uh, so, I don't know how you find your way in. The people in my study, and this was, 20 years ago, they just made it for themselves. They made the work themselves and they put it out there. But we know what the social media does these days, 20 years later, to that kind of work. It distorts it in many ways. So I just think, connections, connections, connections in any way possible that you can figure out how to make them, socially. Tell people that you're looking for work. Don't be embarrassed. Get out, go to events, go to conferences. I know they're expensive when you're not working, but many of them have lower, fees. If you're a doc student looking for an academic job, publish, 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 right? Now, do it now. Don't do it during your dissertation. That's too late, right? Go to conferences, meet with people. A lot of our folks go to HRD, AHRD. They meet other doc students from, all over the country, and they remain connected. Find projects that you can work on with other people. Many of you are graduate students who, have careers. How did you get into those careers? How can you leverage what you know and who you know to make this transition into the academy if that's where you want to go.
Awesome. Thank you. I see Dr. Wright's hand. Did you want to come into the conversation before I pose another question?
Yes, I will take organizer's privilege and just sneak this in. And I'll try not to do what the folks in G-Shed are used to me doing, take 7 questions and bundle it into one. But my question goes back to what Ellen was saying before we started the general Q&A, and that's the role in women, particularly in higher education over the years. So my questions to both of you are, how did the role of women change throughout your career? And how did you benefit from that? Potentially, how did you contribute to that? But not in a regret way, but also what more still needs to be done? if there is a young woman in the audience right now, I invited my freshman students from Guthrie Hall, or even doctoral students that want to be the next Sharon Daniels, want to be the next Ellen Ross. What advice would you two have for that young lady sitting here today? So that's my question.
Do you want to start, Ellen?
Yeah. As I alluded to in my comments earlier, it's a complicated, complex question. My observation is, first of all, I came through a school of ed. My the provost, the president of the university teachers college was a woman at the time. The chair of my department was a woman. Women had a presence in schools of ed when I came into the academy and into GSHED when I was hired by a woman dean here, and she had mostly women associate in associate degrees. Associate dean positions. So the visibility of women were always there from the start of my academic career. However, as I started to get more involved in my job, I realized that for the most part, the real action, at least in GSHED, is at the program level. And for the most part, at the time, at least in my department, the programs were being run by men, but the women were doing the work. Maria's laughing because she was one of those women. Until they retired, and then the women took on those jobs. But hey, guess what? There was nobody to turn the work over to. We lost our staff. The ELP, at the time I was hired, had how many staff? For those of you who remember, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, plus 3 TAs, right? That's 8 people that we could have, worked with and managed a lot of the administrative work, of which there's a lot when it comes to a cohort program that recruits 30 doc students a year. When women started taking over the program, those resources went away to the point now where there's just one staff person. That's it. No TAs, right? And they still want us to recruit 20, 30 doc students a year. So yeah, visibility is one thing, but having the resources to do the work and having the relationships to get the resources, right, is another. And I don't see much progress being made on that front. Just saying. That's where we have to work, I think.
Yeah, what I would contribute is that, as Ellen noted, there are many examples of women in administrative positions and in high administrative positions. And yet that isn't what gets rewarded in terms of promotion. As I mentioned before, once I took on different administrative roles, what suffered was my research,
Right.
my individual research, which is what is evaluated for promotion. So I retired as an associate professor.
And
I didn't have the publications that I felt would be required to apply for full professor. But, I chose the path of administration. Our research showed with the ELAM and ELATE studies, the women in academic medicine and engineering, is that women were being promoted again in administrative positions, but the higher administrative positions, they were being sort of sidetracked into positions that also weren't promoted within the administrative line. So, some of that's been corrected. There are policies that have been developed to help. And, originally there was evidence that showed that women were disadvantaged if they tried to take advantage of some of the policies, like the ability to take time off, the tenure clock for childbirth, things like that. And I haven't kept up with the literature to see if that's getting any better, but I think there have been steps forward, but there's still a lot that needs to occur.
Thank you so much. We got some follow-up questions, and we have some that were already in the chat that I think are relevant to this line of thinking. One of them that I want to take on is from previously in the chat. There was a question around when we're thinking about this, it was around collaboration. And how do you think we can think about opportunities, maybe new creative approaches to creating research collaborations, writing collaborations, grounded in the programs at GW, specifically in the follow-up question?
So if I understand the question is how is it we can integrate the publishing part into the curriculum more intentionally?
Yeah,
Is
or
that
how are there opportunities for creative new approaches to creating collaborations, maybe within the school program level?
I
What
see.
do you think?
Uh, yes, and we've got very bright students who write well and think very clearly and are quite innovative in their work. And we have faculty whom would love to spend more time with our students in cultivating their expertise and in engaging them in our work. But that takes time and it takes resources, which quite frankly, our students nor us have, right? I mean, our students, many of them are graduate students, so they're older. Many of them have families. Many of them have pretty demanding jobs. I mean, I've supervised one shy of 30 dissertations, or at least I will at the end of my dissertation work. I haven't published any of them. Not to say that they weren't publishable. They are. They are. But finding time to do it while running programs and going to work and doing the things that people need to do to keep, the lights on and the doors open is hard to find. It's hard to get that kind of work. And I think that's just kind of the nature of our student body at this point. So, can we integrate it into the classroom? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we try, Maria takes her classes to conferences and they all submit papers to the conference, right? That's a form of publication, right? We can certainly do that. I think there's wonderful opportunities for cross-program collaboration. Just we need somebody to be able to organize it. And I think look at here. I mean, we have, I don't know how many people, there's like 30 people now. There were more earlier. Most of them are students. So I know they're interested and they, can find some time to engage if we provide the forum. I don't know, Sharon, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's an essential part of, the growth as a professional. So anything that we can do to ensure that happens. One of the things that I struggled with my last couple of years there in GSHED was trying to break down the definitions of what qualified as, the work that we did. Were there ways of expanding that so that we didn't all have to be doing exactly the same thing, but are there things that people could do that would benefit the organization and the individuals within it, so that as a whole, the community would benefit. We're so traditional in defining everything in terms of our work, in terms of course load, and how we can parse that out. And if we could break away from that and find other ways to acknowledge contributions, I didn't get very far with it.
That's, I think, so important, Sharon. I think that's the next great frontier, right? How to account for faculty effort. And I'll tell you one thing right now. At some point, even though I'll be very honest here, even though I love teaching, I'm burnt out with teaching, right? At some point, you know, you've done it, you either have to update the curriculum or step aside and let somebody else younger come behind you and bring their research and their work into the fore, right? Um, and quite frankly, I've reached the age where I don't want to keep up with it anymore. I'm tired. I kind of like my Dewey and my Vygotsky. I'm happy knowing those two, right? And others. Um, so, I mean, I do learn a lot from my students now who bring new stuff, right, to their research, and that's wonderful. But I need to step aside because GW pays me to teach mostly. And then, oh yeah, I have service and I have research and I have this, that, and the other thing because I'm a faculty member. Um, but what they pay me for is to teach because that's how they measure my effort by class load, right? And so are there things that I could be doing to respond to some of these questions about mentoring and about, you know, um, working with folks that didn't have the same life experience or positionality as I do to support them in their career into the academy and elsewhere? Yeah, I'd love to do that. But, I can't stick around for that because I won't be paid for that, right? And not that pay means everything, but there's no role for that, right? Faculty, just, you either die on the vine, take up seats, right? Retire in place, or you move on and you create space for others, right? Um, you know, I that I could tell a story, but it's not my story, so I won't. But there's just so much more I think retiring faculty and emeriti faculty could be doing to address some of these needs and questions that we're just not invited to do or supported.
Thank you. And as a follow-up, there was a question in the chat that asked if you have any advice that you could offer to women who may not share the same identities or pathways that you've had, including women of color, neurodivergent women, or women from other backgrounds that maybe are aspiring to be a part of the academy. Do you have any thoughts or advice when it comes to that?
You have to take care of yourself. I mean, that has to be a priority and has to be measured in terms of the different roles and responsibilities that you take on. I think it's too too often, I think young faculty get overextended uh, because of the pressures and take on too much to the detriment of themselves. And so I just think recognizing your own limitations, your needs, your desires, how it fits in with the rest of your life is incredibly important.
Yeah. That's such great advice. I wish somebody would have given it to me when I first started. And I was a lot older than some of you are looking for these kinds of jobs, right? Um, so yeah, I also think, kind of know your worth, know what you can bring, and what you can't, and be transparent about that. Ask for help and support, I mean, you don't have to go to a faculty meeting and ask for it, but there's got to be a few people whom, you've exchanged glances with that, you might want to get to know a little bit better, who can maybe include you in on a project. That's another thing, right? As somebody doing interesting research or has published something that you found interesting and on point with what your work is, can you reach out to them and have a conversation? I'm looking at DJ here. I know he's done that with his study, right? Ended up with a committee member whom he didn't know, right? So, I think, ask for help, and not, help, but ask for support, right? And be clear about what Sharon said, what you're willing to do and where your boundaries are, but also be open about kind of, what's new and exciting for you and how it is you can engage it. It's a tough situation right now. I like to say higher ed is going through what I've seen a lot of other industries go through in my time as a union representative negotiating displaced worker training resources, right? They're going through an entire industrial restructuring. Everything's changing, right? The norms, the technologies, the classification systems, how we organize things. Dwayne is, he knows this from labor relations background, right? It's an entire restructuring of the institution of education, right? It is a hard time because what happens is people enter into it and continue to operate through the old mindsets, right? And the policies don't keep up, right? And it's brutal. It's brutal, and the resources shrink. So it is a really hard time to try to get into academia these days because we're wiping out the entry level, right? And it's not just GW and GSHIT, it's all over. And we're, cutting the pipeline off at its source. So it's really, really hard. So one of the questions I have is how is it that I can continue to do what I do without having the burden of doing it within an institution that's really hard to be in right now? And that might be a question that you ask, how can you do research? Who can you do research with? How can you, take on an educator role, elsewhere, right? It doesn't have the cachet maybe as the academy, but I don't think the academy is what it used to be either. So that's another way to kind of think about, what opportunities exist. And it might not be in the academy, unfortunately, for all of us. For now, it might change.
I hope that's right. That I see it as well, that we are in this huge moment of what is going to happen with higher ed and where are things going. But I hope that the value of faculty expertise becomes central once again, and hopefully for our students and others on the market sooner than later, for sure. Thank you, Dr. Scully-Russ and Dr. Dannels. I have a couple other questions that I want to try to squeeze in, and I'm keeping my eye on the clock. And again, thank you, Dr. Scully-Russ, through her email in the chat. So if we don't get to your question and it was specific to her, please feel free to email her. But I'd like to continue with at least two more lines of questioning. The first is, what was the most or one of the most challenging things you encountered when it came to teaching doctoral students?
I think for me, probably the most challenging was the different levels of existing knowledge that students would come into. I used to teach some of the required research methods courses, and the ones you love and that you hold dearly. But people would come in with totally different levels, and yet we had certain expectations, and trying to adjust and make sure that those that really understood were being challenged enough to move forward, and yet those that is still the deer in the headlights, that we were able to figure out a way to get them the understanding that they needed and the confidence to move forward. So I think that was one of my greatest challenges. I think one of my greatest rewards was teaching the courses where I would have students coming in from different schools, and the way that they all contributed to each other's learning I think that was probably the most rewarding.
Yeah. That's a tough question, whoever raised it. Because there's so much of it that's challenging. And I have to agree with Sharon in that it's just meeting people where they're at and providing them with their own pathway through the curriculum, right? While also trying to build a learning community, right? And offer a what somewhat coherent curriculum, right? So there's lots of moving parts to working with doc students, I believe. It's not just, here's the template curriculum, the standard professional knowledge that you need to be a professional in this field, right? I'm not disparaging that kind of technical training, but it's not doc studies, right? Doc studies is really building new scholars, new scholar practitioners, and helping them find their own way and their own voice, through the literature. And that takes getting to know people, right? In a somewhat intimate way. And how do you do that when you've got a class of 20 and you meet them, or 10, and you meet them in their second and third semester? And it's like I don't know how to do that. One course at a time. I know how to do it, meeting them on the way in and accompanying them throughout. But again, that's the role of the program director, whom I no longer am. So I've struggled more this last couple of years with those dynamics than I ever have, even on my way in as a new academic. So that's kind of what I find challenging.
I think that this last set of questions builds right on that. Thank you, Dr. Scully-Russ. I have two questions that I've paired together about what it means to be human in this industry, in this moment,
Ooh.
and in your experiences. So the first one reads, throughout your careers, how have you managed to stay authentic, especially in environments when authenticity is not rewarded, but may be penalized in various ways? And the second question that I've paired with it is, with the emphasis we are seeing and feeling on artificial intelligence, what are your thoughts on opportunities in education and learning to preserve the value of humans in the workforce, in the world of work, perhaps in the academy? So again, how have you managed to stay authentic? And with this new age of generative artificial intelligence, do you have any thoughts on where you see things going?
I always prioritized relationships, and the importance of the relationships. Um, and I think that's kind of what saw me through. And in terms of how AI fits into that,
Yeah.
that's not an area AI is threatening right now. Well, it is, but it isn't. So I'll leave it at that, and Ellen will have something more profound to say.
Or at least more. I don't know about profound. Interesting questions. Authenticity. For those of you who really know me, I'm not sure it's a thing. Um, uh, I think we're much more situational by nature as people and as humans, right? So the question is, I think, goes back to what Sharon says. It's relational. Who can I be when I'm with you? Nora Bateson asks, right? I think I have that. I'm studying with Nora Bateson these days, and that's one of her questions. Who can I be when there's Julie. Julie, yes, you like that quote when we introduced it last year in your course. So who can I be when I'm with you, right? And I think that calls forth very different personalities and very different understandings of authenticity, right? And I like to say, who can I be when I'm with my students? I hope I can be an educator. I hope I can be someone who listens and who can make a connection, right? I think I'm fairly good at that for those whom I work with, right? To really listen to what they're talking about and what they want to do, and connect them up to a conversation in the field, right? And to other people who are engaging in that conversation. So it's not just about you and me, but how do we connect as a community of scholars and learners, right? So that you can contribute. That's the point, right? The point of scholarship is not receiving. It's dialogue, engagement, and recreating knowledge and practices, right? Through our relationships. So it's kind of where I'm thinking, and AI can't do that. AI can't go there. Hopefully, not yet. I mean, there's other things AI can do, but it can't do that.
Well, I think ending on the relational and the ways that we as human to human still have that as and should have it as a basis is a wonderful place for me to thank you both so much. To those of you that we weren't able to get to your questions, I still have a list more than half a page long. Such wonderful questions. Thank you to our audience for your engagement. What a wonderful event. Thank you so much, Dr. Wright. I will hand it back to you.
All I can say is thank you, Dr. Daniels. Thank you, Dr. Scully-Russ. We didn't even get to mention your vineyard.
No.
There's so much about you, quite frankly, so much about you both that an hour and a half cannot cover it. It has been truly an honor of my young life to just know both of you for just a little bit of it. G-Shed would not be a place the way it is without you. And we are sad to let you go, but we are joyous for what we had with you at the time. And anything we do good in the future, please know you'll have a part within it. I thank the audience for coming out on the last day of Women's History Month for this event. And as we always ask for all our events here at G-Shed, don't just leave it in the room. If we just had this conversation and nothing comes out of it, nothing perks your mind, it might have been a waste of time. But I know for a fact the knowledge shared here today could help everyone that has been on this call, will be on this call, will view the video after. And for that, I thank our guests, but I thank you as well.